Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this live Ask the Authors event. Apologies for the rubbish quality of my video. My laptop has just given up the ghost and actually died. But it's not me you're here to see, it is JPB Gerald. So we're going to talk a little bit about his work and his book. And then you will have the chance to ask some questions. So if you type those into the chat box, we'll leave about 20 minutes for questions at the end of the hour, and my colleagues will feed me the most interesting ones to ask. So JPB Gerald is an adult educator and theorist, and he is a 2022 graduate of the EdD program in instructional leadership from CUNY in the US. Through his writing, teaching, podcast, and his public scholarship overall, he seeks justice for the racially, linguistically, and neurologically minoritized. He made the decision last year to step outside of academia, and he's now National Training Manager for Momentous Capital, who are a community development financial institution and a non-profit organisation. But most crucially for today, he is the author of Antisocial Language Teaching, English and the Pervasive Pathology of Whiteness, which we published in September last year. And this year it was shortlisted for the Ball Book Prize, which is quite an achievement for your first book. So I wanted to start by asking you whether you could tell us what the impetus for this book was, what experiences both personally and professionally led you to want to write this book.
Hi, thanks, Anna. It's interesting. We've been working together for 3 years. This is like the third live conversation we've ever had. But what's interesting is that the nuts and bolts of it were that once we started talking about putting a book together, it came together. But why I wanted to pursue this line of writing is really the question here, because, when I was in my doctoral program, because I was a student when I wrote the book, they tell you to look for gaps in the research, right? And when I started my program in 2018, I'm looking around, and I had been the manager of an adult education language program in New York, where I live. And, they have bad attendance, right? They're pre-programs, they have bad. So let me see if I can fix that, right? And for those of you who read the book, this story is in the book, but whatever. And I started looking at research related to that. There's not a lot of research on like specifically adult education program attendance, right? So you're piecing things together on attendance and adults and education to like put right. But anyway, I kept coming across things, and it seemed clear that much as I wanted to maybe not go in that direction, that racism was coming up as an issue in these programs, right? I read one study that is cited in the book, where they were saying that these students were dropping out of the program, and they asked the teachers and the students why, right? They were able to track down the students who left, and the students said, I know this stuff, and they're not listening to me when I tell them X, Y, and Z, right? They didn't respect them as full adults. So I started digging into that, and I started asking people I know in the language field questions, and people got really defensive when I asked them questions. And I said, that's the line of study, that defensiveness, right? And so I followed that into writing a short article about what I called the altruistic shield. And then I said, it was January of 2020, which is interesting to think about in retrospect. But I was on a break from school. I said, I'm gonna write another article. So I wrote another one, and it got published. It got published in May of 2020. And then people started paying attention to what I was saying. And here we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And you were an English teacher in Korea, is that right? Is it Korea?
Yeah, I started in
Yeah.
South Korea, and then I came back to New York and was doing the same thing. So
Yeah. So you worked within the EFL industry yourself for a while as a teacher.
certainly.
Were there any particular writers or scholars or your own teachers who influenced your thinking and the way your writing went?
Well, there's a couple of things, right? So when I started again on this sort of line of writing, it was right around the time I was introduced to the concept of translanguaging, as anyone watching this probably has heard of. And of course, the scholars who were sort of around that part of the field. And also I was interested. introduced, that's the word, to racial linguistic ideology, so Nelson Flores and Jonathan Rosa, and then looking at the unfortunately scant discussion of racism and language teaching. So we're talking about Kubota and some other people, and then my process, which they don't really tell you to do in academia, which is bad, is that I just started reaching out to some of these people directly. Like I just started asking them questions, and most of them responded. So I've spoken to Kubota and Nelson Flores and Jonathan Rosa, not at length, but to some extent. I've spoken extensively to Vijay Ramjatan, who's a Canadian scholar on like accent issues. And so their sort of counsel and the fact that I was sort of trying to write publicly and thinking like, I don't want these people to think what I'm saying isn't legitimate. So it was important for me to make the work valuable. And then in my writing style, which we'll get to later, which is very important to me. When I started my doctoral studies, they said, and I'm like, I'm not sure if I believe you, but okay. They said, we want to make sure you have a voice in your writing. And I'm like, I've read these journals. There's no voice in there. Are you sure you actually want me to do that? They said yes. And I said, okay. So I wrote the way that I write, and I only know how to write one way. And it resonated with people. So now I write that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Were there other people on your doctoral program who were also encouraged to write in non-traditional academic ways, or was it something about the subject you were studying, do you think, that encouraged them to want to do that?
I mean, I can't really speak for them in the sense of what lessons they got. And then of course we weren't all taking all the same, like at the beginning we were all taking the same classes.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So at the start, like the class where they said keep your voice in it, all of them in my cohort were in that class. That's the like intro class. So like whether they listened or not, I don't know. But later we all did take a class on writing that was specifically taught by David Connor, who's a disability studies scholar and whose work has also been influential on my work. And he was putting forth the idea to do things differently. I can't say that they listened to him, but by that point, I was already pretty firm in my style. So he was just sort of backing up what I already believed. So I would say that while they were training us to like, here's how journal articles work, if you just sort of listen to that, then you wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not even talking about skill. I just mean style. So if my colleagues, my classmates were listening to that, I don't really know. But I do know that there are a few people in the program, whether they're in my year or before me or after me, who have tried to do things a little bit differently. And I mean, I feel like that's the stuff that really resonates with people, because to me, if you read some of these journal articles, you're just looking at the data. You're like, okay, I guess I'll cite this. They said they had some interesting statistics here, right? But you don't really care what they said. And to me, what's the point of writing it if they don't care what you actually said?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're going to talk a bit later about how people are responding to the content of your work. But have you had any response to the style of your work and your voice, and in particular?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. It's not just this book. All right, sorry if you hear my dog in the background. All of my writing is of a similar style. Obviously, it's slightly more formal in journals and slightly less formal when I write like my own like little essays online or something. But it's the same general style, right? It's, I don't want to say confessional, but conversational to some extent. I do use contractions, not all the time, but like I use first person, right? Because to me, first of all, it helps me never really get writer's block, because if I feel stuck, I just start writing the fact that I'm thinking about something, and it usually gets me into whatever. I might go back and take it out later, but that means that like if I write down, I was stuck on this topic, it often ends up in there, and then I'm able to get to the next point. A lot of people don't like the style, is what I'm saying. I mean, some people love the style, and then I feel like some people really don't like it. What I think, and I don't have any way to prove this, is that there are people who are uncomfortable with the information in the book. And it is, however, well sourced enough that like they can't really disagree with like, here is a citation that's linking these two things, right? They can't really say that that's incorrect because it's there, right? But if they delegitimize my style, then they don't even really have to engage with the argument. I don't have any problem with people engage with my argument and say that my argument isn't strong enough. And frankly, I wrote the book at this point, more than almost 2 years ago. I know it came out last year, but it takes a while to edit and all that. And even now I've learned things where I'm just like, I probably would have said that thing differently by now. So please discuss the argument with me. But whether it's this, whether it's journal articles, which I basically at this point don't write anymore because I don't have to, or edited volumes, the first thing that people go after is like, oh, this isn't formal enough. Oh, this is not the way academic stuff is supposed to be written, right? Oh, this is not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, at that point, I feel like you're missing the forest for the trees, as we say, right? It's just like, okay, but what is it that I'm saying? And if you have a problem with that, let's talk about it. But if you really just want to talk about the fact that I write about my own experience along with the data, then, you're just missing the point.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. It strikes me, I don't know, I don't think this is an expression in the US. In the UK, we'd say it's a Marmite book. That do you know what Marmite is?
I know what Marmite is. I don't know what you mean.
So they used to have an advertising slogan that was like, you either love it or you hate it. And it's like, no one's kind of neutral about your book. I think it's like, yeah.
I mean, I want people to know where I stand on things, and I feel like I had a different, when I was starting on this, I had an experience, which is also in the book, but again, talking about it. So someone here, some of you won't have read it. So where I was at a conference and I posted something very generic that was about race and racism, but I didn't even use the words race and racism. I wasn't trying to be soft. It just wasn't, it was like an Instagram post, right? And I'm not really gonna get that hard hitting on Instagram because it's a visual medium and so forth. It's just a picture. And someone I know just got in their feelings and just got so upset by what I said, even though I didn't even say the word racist, right? And I talked to somebody about it. And I realized that for people who are gonna be upset about this, they'll be upset even if you're really soft about it. Even if you're indirect, they'll find a way to be upset. So you might as well be direct.
Yeah, and I can remember I think when we first started talking about this book and you sent me a proposal and you because the title is kind of, you're laying your stall out with the title. There's no backing off in the title, that you were kind of like, that is the title and we can talk about the content of the book, but the title is the title, and that's the way it is. And I think that's sounds like, again, that's you kind of going, well, there's no point in me attempting to soften this. This is what it is. And
yeah, trying to go in the side door, it doesn't work, right? Because when I was younger, I think even before I was doing anything academic, I just mean as a person, I was around people who in retrospect, I wouldn't be around today. People I was in school with. And, I would try to be subtle about certain things. And then what happened, and this is a process that led me to writing the articles that I did. And again, I wrote the article before the uprisings of 2020. The timing just happened to be that way. It came out the same month that all that stuff happened, but I wrote it, like I said, in January 2020, right? But this was a several-year process for me because I went to a lot of pretty, let's just say homogenous schools. And my classmates, many of whom I got along with, were very, not all of them, but plenty of them were perfectly respectful to me. Right. And I wasn't getting a lot of individual like hatred or anything. The people who were mean to me weren't mean to me for that reason, is what I'm saying. We can talk about that with disability, but talking about something different right now. So anyway, but then I also started running. I'm a runner, and running as a recreational sport is also, kind of homogenous. Anybody can run, but certain communities run more often than others. I'm not talking about the champion sprinters, okay? I'm talking about people just on the street running. And when you realize is that I realized that a lot of people saw me as quote unquote one of the good ones or one of the safe ones, right? I didn't think I was safe, but I started to hear what they were saying around me, not about me, because they were saying that I was different from what they were saying. And I said, oh, wait a second. How did this happen? How did I get to this position where you thought that this is who I was? Right. And I spent probably from 2014 when the Ferguson uprisings happened, right, and the modern Black Lives Movement started, through 2016 and the election, and then all this, all the stuff that's been happening, I just started to just realize, like, I was not being as direct with the people around me as I needed to. And I just I had to get rid of a lot of people, because especially as I got to the point where I was going to have a child, I said, I can't have my son around people like this, where they're going to see him because he's my son as one of the good ones, and they're going to say that stuff to him, or their kids are going to say that stuff to him. So, trying to go in and say, like, well, I'm going to call it diversity and then get really direct about whiteness, that's not going to work. So, yeah, I might sell a few more copies at first, and then they'll be mad about it, but I won't sell as many. And it's not about that, but you get what I'm saying. It won't sell as many in the long run, is my point.
Yeah. So it was published a year ago, the book. Is there anything that I think you said, there's stuff you'd maybe go back and do slightly differently now. Is there anything major that you'd change about the book?
I mean, not major, just, some of it is that there was sort of unrelated to the book. There was a time crunch going on. I don't mean the time I had to write the book, because I set my own deadline, which is my own problem. But in that the interviews that I did were with people who had taken a class that I taught. That was part of my dissertation. The interviews were not from my dissertation. The interviews in general for my dissertation were with white teachers in general. And then the ones for the book were specifically for white language teachers, right? So I just sort of segregated the groups, but I asked them basically the same questions. And the problem, which is both for my dissertation and the book, is that, like, I taught the class from July of 2020 to like July of 2021, right? Several cohorts. And then I went back to interview people in like late 2021. And the research questions, some of them didn't matter how long I waited, in the sense that they were about their like lives and upbringings. Well, that's fine. And some of them were about like what had happened since they'd been in the class. Well, some of them were only in the class like 6 months earlier. So frankly, if they're going to try to change their institutions, which was what they were supposed to do, they just didn't have that much time. I knew that. I wrote it into the book. I wrote it into the dissertation. Now I'm curious, like, all right, what's happened? And there were other people who took the class who didn't respond to me. What happened to them? I mean, in terms of the stuff they were supposed to do, have they just gone back to how they were doing things? Have they continued to try? I mean, in a sense, it's not a mistake as much as like, I don't have as much information as I could have because I was in a bit of a rush, but that's just how I am. So.
And what have reactions? Have people reacted as you expected? Are people using the book and your ideas as you expected? Have you been surprised by any reactions?
I mean, it's not so much. I mean, the book has been there. I sort of have two different lines of scholarship, even though they're related. They're all related to race and racism, but like I've got the side. All of the work that I do has something to do with race, language, and disability in some capacity. But I have an angle that's more towards the race and language side where disability is sprinkled in. And I have an angle that's more towards the race and disability side where language is sprinkled in, right? So on this side, the language side, I'm honestly not surprised in a lot of ways that like there have been, and it's been encouraging, people who told me how much that my work, whether it's this book or the articles or the podcast, because they're all kind of about the same stuff, have resonated with them. And it's really nice to hear, because I taught a college class this summer and the students all told me that my work meant something to them. And that's nice to hear. I'm not diminishing that. I'm just saying, and it's not surprising. That's been nice. But in another way, so I'm not surprised that a certain portion of people have found it really important to them. And it's not surprising, but in a good way. And on the other hand, I'm not surprising that some people are just mad, but they were always going to be mad. So, I'm not super worried about them. There was one guy who followed me around the internet to talk about how bad my work was, mostly because I called him racist once before this, and then he was mad for 2 years. And I'm like, you're proving your point. You're proving my point, man. You're proving my point. So although he weirdly one day said, I won't do this anymore. I don't know. Maybe he had a change of heart. I don't think he had a change of heart. He decided to shut up. Weird. But anyway, go to conferences and like, maybe this is an academia thing, certainly not an American exclusive thing, but the presentations are the same. You know, the stuff that people are selling are the same. I remember I brought a bunch of my books to a conference where I was already presenting, right? About the book. And I bought a bunch of them, and I sold them, but I sold them to the people who kind of either already knew or who knew about me already, and then maybe one or two people who hadn't heard about it, right? But they knew my name or something, or they were already interested. Not the kind of book that or work in general that brings in new converts. Right, what it is, and the audience I'm going for is, I want resonance for people who already agree with me, because the book didn't exist, there wasn't one about this, right? And I want to give a little bit more courage to people who agree but are a little bit on the fence about what to do. That's my goal. And I think that's the largest group of people, is that no matter what you see on the TV or in the newspaper, the large group of people are not out and out hateful. They're just sort of like, I think that this is the right thing to do, but I don't know what to do about it, and I'm busy, right? And so I was trying to show there are small things you can do, there are things you can do, and it's also important that you understand that the whole system is tied together, so it's not just explicit about racism. There's a lot of things you can do in terms of power structures. But the people who out and out don't agree, they can stay over there. I'm not super worried about them. And I saw, when I explained what my book was to people, I saw them sort of look at it and just like put it down. And I was like, all right. Although I did sell all the ones I brought, so it was fine.
Yeah, yeah. How about have you seen the book cited in any kind of journal articles or anything? What's your sense of how scholars are responding to it in their writing?
Yeah, it seems like, I think it has 15 citations so far.
Uh-huh.
The Google Scholar thing tells me. My
Yeah.
article, the previous one that was before this, has like 48, although a few of them are me, so maybe it's 45. Um, I'm not saying I'm obsessively checking it, but Google emails me every time it happens, so I'm just like, all right, I guess I'll look. 15, considering it's a book as opposed
Mhm.
to an article, right? Like, because my article is like 7 pages, so you can get through that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
And the book, like, some of the people I suspect are citing it because they just know what it's about. Um, and some of the people I know have read it because they're people who know me. I think that, it'll be interesting to see what happens as it goes on. I do think between the article and the book, which again are about similar subjects, is that the book is much more expansive. I put myself in a position, and I don't know if this was my intent, but it's what happened, where, like, if you're going to talk specifically about whiteness and language teaching, you kind of have to go through me in a weird way.
Mhm.
Like, and not a lot of people are talking about that. But if you're specifically going to talk about that, like, it's sort of like, if you mention racial linguistics, you got to go through Flores and Rosa, right? And if you mention trans language, you got to go through a few different people, right? And like, not this is nearly as big because it's not a theory, I guess. But if you're going to talk about this subset of racism in language teaching, you sort of have to go through the channels that involve citing me, and it'll be interesting to see if people still care about not me but the subject in the future. To be clear, I'm not done, so I'm going to make sure they care about it, but it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, 15 for a book really isn't that bad.
Mhm.
Because it takes a while to read a book, and as much as I think that my style is more accessible than other academic books, it's still an academic book. There's a whole bunch of citations in there, and you still got to, like, especially the first part, which is all like history. If you can get through the first part, the rest is really easy to read. The first part, I'm going through like history of like racism and ableism and language and all this stuff, and it's very important for the context of the book, but like, it's a little bit of the vegetables before you get to your meal. So
So I reaching beyond the kind of traditional academic milieu is clearly quite important to you. You do, the podcast, which you mentioned, and you write for places like Medium and the Language Magazine, and as well as doing the scholarly kind of articles and stuff. Are you? I mean, we've talked a bit as well about kind of what you achieve with publishing with us, because we're an academic publisher. Kind of how does it all fit together in your head? Like, does it all fit together in your head in terms of reaching those different audiences, and what do you think you're achieving with the book, that you perhaps wouldn't do with just the odd scholarly journal article and the more kind of outreachy stuff that you do?
When people have a business, they talk about diversifying your revenue streams. I'm not really talking about money in this case, but I'm talking about diversifying my reach, right? It's not necessarily broadening. I mean, yes, but in the sense that, there are certain people who are just never going to read an academic journal. Not only because they're not interesting, but because they literally don't have access, because journals are a very silly system. And I will say that to everybody. And then the academics like, why don't they listen to us? I'm like, you won't let them read your stuff. Anyway, so that, and like to this point, like I literally don't write in journals unless it's like a special issue and the editor is my friend. He's like, please, Justin, write for me. Then I'm like, okay, I'm not seeking out journals anymore because I'm not trying to be a tenure track professor, so I don't need to. So ignoring journals for a second, between the edited volumes that I've been featured in, and there's still more coming out, and including one with Multilingual Matters, right? Like there's a bunch of, I got one coming out that's with different, yeah, there's a lot of chapters in different places coming out. And then there's this book and what I write in the future. Those things are because they're slightly less formal than journals, but they're still academic. Frankly, there is something to be said that like academics paying attention to you matters if you're going to be a respected person in academia, even if I'm not actually a career academic in that sense. And we can talk about that or we can not talk about that, but also it's a muscle, right? I want to use that muscle and keep it strong because I do need to make, academically sourced arguments because, it's useful for people who are skeptical if you're just saying something not just qualitatively, but like of your own narrative, right? There are people who will simply dismiss something that is your own narrative. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it is. But I also do non-academic stuff, right? There's the podcast, obviously, although I do end up talking to a lot of academics. We're just having an informal conversation. And then I'm also like, in the future, like I'm definitely going to write non-academic books also. Right. So like in that way, I'm just sort of covering all my bases. Like I'm, thinking about a project which will not interfere with anything with you all. Don't worry. For K-12 teachers in the States, that's more about neurodivergent students of color. Right. But it's from the perspective of we're not former neurodivergent, we're just not students anymore. Like adults. So that I can reach the sort of K-12 teacher audience in the United States, because understandably, they're not going to necessarily read all the academic books in the world. So, I'm just trying to go in all these directions at the same time so that I'm getting my point across.
And what do you hope, because I mean it's your work has a clear purpose. I think there's that you when you write, you're writing to achieve something over and above kind of you're not trying to get tenure anymore, but what is it, what do you hope that people, I guess particularly with regard to the book, involved in the English teaching industry, what single point do you hope they will take away from it? What's the kind of the kernel?
There's certain things that I don't have much hope of changing all that much in the near future. And I say this in the book, right? My hope with this book in particular, and I'll have slightly different hopes with each book, right? Is to sort of lay out some connections that people may not have seen, right? Because I don't think because the whole overarching structure of the diagnosis thing is I think one of the clever things about the book. But also to give people, like I said, a little bit of encouragement if they sort of feel these things but haven't had them put to words yet, right? That's probably the most common thing. When I get a random email from someone who has read it or seen a talk I did or something, that's what I tend to get. I tend to get, I've been feeling these things, but I hadn't seen it written down anywhere, right? And so that's one way. And then another way, especially with the actual, interviews and what the people say, whether it's a direct quote or paraphrased, I'm trying to give people some narratives so that they might see themselves in the model, whether they see themselves in me, because they could, or they see themselves in the people I'm interviewing. The only thing, especially for white teachers, the only, for what white teachers who care about this stuff, I should say, it's not all of them, is they'll see someone who's a real crusader, right? And I'm not trying to denigrate people who are crusaders, but not everybody can be that. And so I'm trying to give people models for like, well, I care about this, but like I gotta keep a roof over my head and so forth. And it's like, all right, so you know, the fact that there are other people out there who care about this helps people understand that they're not alone, because part of the problem with these hierarchies is that they separate us. And so I'm trying to bring people together in some sense. It's people will think it's a divisive book. It's divisive in that I'm trying to get rid of a group of people I don't care about, but I'm trying to bring everybody else together. And if you read all the way to the end of it, you'll see that the last thing I say to people is to keep talking, because if we all keep talking, they can't stop all of us.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that's the value of, and again, talking about the different types of publication, that's the value of a book like this for the kind of conversations you're trying to have, is that people can, and the style that you've written it in as well, is that people can, as you say, recognize themselves or their students or the kind of context that they're working in the narrative element, but are then able to say, but here's a book with references, and it kind of looks official, and take that to people and say, look, it's not just me. This is this guy's published a whole academic book on this. Like,
yeah, I mean, again, if I'd be lying if it wasn't, I mean, you can go all the way to getting the degree in the first place, right? I mean, I was always, I think, like what, I don't know what you want to call it, intellectually capable of getting this degree. I mean, not when I was 5, but I'm just saying, like, I could have done it earlier. But I waited because, and to go back to those journals, is that like, obviously I met many professors because I'd been in college and so forth. But what I mean is that, like, first of all, because I was a little bit younger, my direct peers hadn't finished any degrees like that yet, so I didn't have as many models of like, my friends are doing this, so they didn't see, once you start to be in there, you realize everybody's just a regular person, and you're like, oh, okay. But my friends didn't have doctorates at that time, so didn't seem that way to me. And then what's the only other thing that you have is like, experts to show up on TV or in other places to talk about things. I'm like, these people know so much more than I do. I can't be that. Or journals. And I tell you, again, even if you get access to a journal article, because some of them are open access, you're just like, what is this nonsense that I cannot read? Like, what? And so I didn't apply to these programs at all, because I'm like, I don't think I can write like that. And it's true, I can't, so I don't. But I didn't realize that I could succeed in this without writing in that way. And in a way, it's not like my main subject matter, although it comes up in the writing, but the sort of academic language in general, and sort of the hierarchies it upholds. Another chapter I'll be writing in a volume is about that. Is one of the things that I'm trying to break down, mostly by example. And with a couple of comments I put, there's occasional like pages that I go off talking about academic language in the book, which, I'm glad you all didn't cut out. But I think that it's just really important. And it's sad, especially being a person of color and a Black person, that like I could have had these ideas 6 years ago, but there's people who wouldn't listen to me if I didn't have the doctor, and if I hadn't written the book or the articles, right? Both is the point, right? First of all, I mean, I didn't have the doctorate when I wrote the book, so like you all would have published even if I didn't finish my degree. But my point is that like there are people, and some of it might even be subconscious, where like, and like they're not like hateful, but like they see the DR or the EDD, depending, although I usually use the DR. And then their eyes open a little bit, and then they see it, journal articles in a book, and then their eyes are really open, and then their ears are open to what I'm saying. Whereas if they heard the exact same words, but they didn't see the DR and they didn't see the journals and the citations, then they wouldn't listen. So I'm trying to use, and also especially with regards to like disability, as someone who's in the disability community, like I guess I don't quote unquote look disabled, which is a harmful concept, but you know what I mean. In that sense, that I'm trying to, first of all, change some of those stereotypes, and also, make it clear to people that this is another angle of things that they need to care about. even if they only have a narrow conception of what that means. So, there's a lot of stuff I'm trying to do. I don't know that I even have a grand plan. I'm just like the Tasmanian devil. I'm just spinning and kicking up dust. And, every so often I stop and realize that I've, created a lot of things.
I was going to ask you what next, but actually you finished writing this book 18 months ago. So I guess the question is what now, really, rather than what next. What are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, like I said, I'm putting together a couple of projects. There's things we're talking about, right? At Multilingual, right? So this won't be the last you all hear from me on this subject, in fact, people. And then, like I said, I'm doing something non-academic on like neurodivergent students of color in the United States for like K-12 teachers here, because there really aren't any non-academic books on that. It comes up. It's one of those
Sure.
things where it'll be a chapter,
Mhm.
right, in a larger book. It'll be subsumed under disabled kids of color, but it's also all trauma. I'm not trying to pretend that there isn't trauma involved, but like people haven't really heard from us speaking about that. And so I'm trying to put those stories together also. And so that'll keep me busy enough between doing that. And then like, I think I'm supposed to write another chapter at some point. I never, but like, edited volumes, they're always so behind. And so the people email me, like, they say start in September, and then they email me in like January, like, you could start 3 months from now. And I'm like, all right. So there's other things. I have an edited volume that I have the second chapter in coming out in a few weeks, apparently. I almost forgot about that. I wrote that article before I wrote the book. That's how long
Oh,
ago it took
yeah.
these things to come together. And then I have another one of Multilingual Matters that's coming out, I guess, next year at some point.
Yep.
And then there's, another one that I haven't even written the chapter for yet. And, my podcast is always there. In fact, the fifth season starts on Monday, which in the United States is Labor Day. It says that little tagline that you read about the racially, linguistically, neurologically minoritized. I guess it's sort of the tagline for the podcast, but for the work I'm trying to do in general. And so nominally it's about language, but ultimately it's about race, language, disability, and sometimes just me ranting about academia. But now that I'm not in academia, I guess I don't really care that much anymore. You all need to fix your own stuff.
I feel like it'd highlight as well, for those who don't know, that all of that stuff is happening on top of you having a non-academic job.
Yeah, this is just
And
what
the
I do,
time.
and in my spare time. You know, um, right? Like I hear sometimes that academics, they get like a sabbatical to write a book, and I'm like, man, I guess that would be nice, but then I'd be
Yeah,
finished in like 2 weeks, and then
yeah.
because I wrote a novel in April because I was bored.
Why
Um,
not?
and also because my wife likes novels more than she likes this stuff. So I put all the stuff, not language, but the like race stuff in there. And it's a novel. And I wrote it in a few weeks. It's like 150 pages, but it's just these are the things that I do when, I just need, something to do. But yeah, there's this I can't this summer I forced myself not to really start anything because I was talking to you all about stuff and I was talking to the other people about the thing, and I didn't want to start something before I'd start those things.
Yeah.
And my job is not easy. I mean, it is good in the sense that they leave me alone after the workday is over. Like I might get an email, but they're not going to call me at 8 o'clock at night, and that's good. And that's another reason that I'm not in academia. Uh, but I can't just be. I mean, like I can take an hour and do this in the morning, but like I can't just be doing this stuff all day long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless I'm not working. And if I'm not working, it means my son's not in school, which means I'm not doing anything. So like Monday, it's like, oh, how was your holiday? I'm like, it's not my holiday, it's his holiday. Like I'm not he's 3.5. So
Yeah. Holidays are a distant memory when they're that age.
yeah.
So I'm going to attempt to find some questions. This is easy when I'm on my laptop, less easy on my phone. So okay, so we have one from Mary, I think. Are the courses that you mentioned in the book still accessible, and how can we enroll in one of your courses as ELT professionals who want to fight systemic racism in education?
Yeah, I haven't done one in a while, but honestly, I'll do it whenever I get a cohort together. So just email me. My contact information is on the site, right? So you email me and we get a couple of people together, we got a course. So there's your answer.
Brilliant. And we have another question. I can get this to work. I probably can't. Um, do, 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 do. What we talked about how you're not in academia anymore, and that the one of the we've talked a little bit about the fact that you don't get a sabbatical to write a book, but I mean, what briefly, what was behind that decision to step away from academia?
Well, you know, to be honest, so when I started writing the book, I didn't know I wouldn't be in academia. By the time I finished the book, I knew it, and I edited some things to make it clear. But like when I started writing the book, it in January or February 2021, I was still in my third year. I hadn't even finished my comprehensive exam, so I wasn't even a candidate yet. Although it says I was a candidate because I rewrote it like 3 months later, whatever. So I had no idea what would happen. But I also knew that if I kept my head together, that I would finish in 4 years, which is faster than people tend to finish. And I also knew I really didn't like my last job and I wanted out. But I also knew that I wanted a job that would respect my degree, in the sense that they would value it as a, it and the skills as part of the reason they wanted to hire me. But I didn't necessarily want to be one where I had to have it. So then anyway, the real thing that happened is, in the United States, at least, the jobs for the following school year, they're coming out now, right? The people who are going to be hired for the fall of 24, those jobs are coming out now, right? Between like late July and October. Some come out later, but like that's when they're coming out. And so the first one came out, and of course, is 5,000 people for each job, right? And there's specifically ones on like race and language and so forth. People are like, this, you'd be perfect for this. I'm like, all right, I'll apply. Fine. And I applied to a few of them. And what happened is, some of them didn't respond, which is normal. That didn't really offend me, which is true of any job. And then one person recruited me. Like she reached out to me and she wanted to pitch applying to the school. And I said, okay. And the thing is, I'm naive. I didn't know how these things worked. So if I think someone's recruiting me, oh, this is like, I didn't think I would necessarily get the job, but I thought I'd at least, get an interview, right? And I didn't realize that that's not necessarily the case in academia, right? I feel like if someone recruits you for a job outside of academia, you could at least get to the phone screen, and then if you screw up, that's your problem. But like, so I went through that process and I was really hopeful about that. And then I found out that they'd already hired somebody. So I was just mad at that point. And I was like, oh, but the thing is, at first I was mad at what had happened. But then I realized I was mad at like, oh, but this is normal, right? Like she wasn't actually doing anything wrong within the system as it is. They just they spend a lot of time recruiting people. And a lot of the time they each are like, here's my person. And they have an argument about it. And they bring in a few people. And I was like, I don't want to be part of this anymore. And I was like, not for that amount of money. So, I had a kid and I said, all right, Justin. So I was already working in curriculum development. I didn't like my job, but what I realized is I didn't like my boss and managers at the time, but the curriculum development is fine. I enjoy it and I'm good at it. So I started looking for curriculum development jobs and I got it. And, honestly, I'm in a better position than I've been. They respect it. They even allow me to put doctor in my email signature at work. And they call me Dr. Gerald, which is funny. They don't have to, but they seem to enjoy it. They're kind of joking, but they're doing it respectfully. And yeah, it's a job that I really like my coworkers, which sadly is one of the first times I've been able to say that. It's the first job since I got my diagnosis of ADHD. And, I was open about that. They say not to be open about that, but I said, look, if I'm not going to get hired because of that, then it's not going to be the place I want to work anyway. And I was, I had a job. If I didn't have a job and I just needed a job, obviously I'd have to be more risk averse. But I said, I'm going to be open about this in the interview process. And they, walk the walk of being inclusive. And, now I feel like I don't have to hide myself, which I've been doing my whole life. Mm-hmm. Sometimes without even knowing it because I didn't have the diagnosis yet. So in that way, I'm in a good place and I'm able to have one toe in academia, as much as I would like to be, go to a conference here and there. But then because I'm not trying to get a job, I don't have to go any of the sessions I don't want to go to. Right. I don't have to listen to, the plenary is the same, I call it like inspo info, right? Inspirational info, but you're not really learning anything. And it's just someone who's just like, and here is this story of overcoming. And I'm like, okay, so how are you going to change anything, right? You know, and I'm not blaming the plenary speakers. That's what they're hired to do, right? I've been one before, but I did not do inspo info because I don't do inspo info. In fact, in a way, I'm kind of de-inspirational. I'm motivational and then I'll push people, but I don't really want to inspire you because like inspiration is an action.
Yeah, true.
Here's a question.
Yes, so I have another old audience question, which is so it's from D. Gibson, which says, really enjoying your book. I'm about halfway through it. I'm a white hyperlexic statistician and former academic. I gave up academia because of inaccessibility on many levels. I love your points about journal articles and academic language. Do you see that changing in the future at all?
Well, it depends on how long into the future you're talking about, right? Certain things are changing, right? In the sense that there are definitely a lot more open access articles than there were 10, 15 years ago, right? Not as many as there should be, but like there are journals, like for example, the journal, I think, and I said this in the book, I think that part of the, you know, some of it is dumb luck in the sense of, I don't want to call it luck for the horrible things that were happening, but like the timing of when my article came out. But also that article was open access and I didn't really do anything. It's just that I was in a journal that was open access, right? They do that. They all those articles in that journal are open access. And so if my article had been something that had come out then, but it was behind a wall, you know, I don't think it would have mattered. So I think especially like you know what? I don't really care if the stuff that upholds the status quo is not open access. Put your stuff behind the wall. I don't need to see it. But I think especially if you're trying to challenge things, journals need to, you know, think about this. And I think that the ones that care about these things are making a more concerted effort to allow their things to be viewable. And not just journals, because, you know, there are things like practitioner magazines, like Language Magazine. You can read not all, right, but most of their articles, not they just wait a little bit until they come out. I don't have a problem if they like make it exclusive for a couple of weeks or something like that, right? Just in terms of access. And then in terms of the language, you know, honestly, I think we just have to do it, because I think that for the people who I understand that publish or perish, right, they're in that position where they got to get published. You know, they know that there are, you know, editor, what do they call them, reviewer two or whatever, who's gonna pick at their style to say that they shouldn't be in the journal, the issue, whatever. And, you know, they're like, well, I gotta follow the path and I don't have a choice. And I think it's important for more of us to get into positions where we can change that. And that's why I think it's important, even if it's not paid, for us to be those reviewers when we can be, right? And, you know, to the point where I will try very hard to pass through something where I think the ideas are good, even if the style is different or the grammar isn't perfect. Because like, unless you're writing about grammar, I don't care. If you're writing about grammar, probably the grammar should be fine. But like, if you're writing about other stuff, you know, I will sometimes, you know how you can do a private comment to the author? Sometimes I'll be like, look, man, probably the other reviewer is going to comment on this. Let you know, I don't care. You can change it if you'd like to. I can see them saying that, but I won't say it in the sense that it's my criticism. We just have to do it all together. Like, I understand why we don't, like I said, we get separated. They try to break us apart. And I think that it's going to come to a point 5-10 years from now where they almost have no choice financially but to, you know, let more people in or let more people see their stuff. Especially all that, you know, all the schools saying, oh, we don't have any money. And just like, okay, well, you brought this upon yourselves.
So we've got one last audience question, and then I think that will probably be it. This is from Hannah Crawford. And she says, as a person who's openly neurodivergent in your workplace, do you receive any accommodations that help you to be successful? My partner also has ADHD and feels conflicted in requesting support as he's concerned his colleagues and leadership may see his diagnosis as a detriment. Are your supervisors accepting?
So yeah, it wouldn't matter if the organization was accepting if my supervisor wasn't, right? we don't really talk about it. We don't say, he's not like, how is your ADHD today or something. He just, if I say a specific thing, as long as it doesn't get in the way of me getting done what I need to get done, it's fine. But again, I just happen to work in a workplace and for a manager who is accepting of these things. Like, I don't think he's like all that knowledgeable about it. I think he just sees that I get things done and he's like, do what you need to do. I happen to be in a position, just a unique position in my job, because I'm kind of the only education person. So I kind of have a lot of job security. Like, unless I did something egregious, there's nobody in the organization do what I do, which I think is one of the ways that we as neurodivergent people can succeed, is if we get ourselves into positions where we're sort of indispensable and we make it clear that our neurodivergence helps us do these things, which is not, is much easier said than done to get into that position. That's how, because I feel like if I was asking for a lot of accommodations and I at the same time wasn't doing my job well, even if it was because of the accommodations needs, it still just wouldn't go over well. At my last job, I ended up getting diagnosed because I wasn't doing well on certain things, and I managed to keep my job, but I wasn't going to be at the top of that place because I was making mistakes. Now I understand the positions I was being put in were not allowing me to succeed, and now I'm upfront. Like, they asked me, one of the things that I just can't do, not well, is talk and take notes. I just can't do both. And we have a big meeting in a few weeks, and they just asked me, like, can you be the note taker? I'm like, not if you want me to talk. And I would have been afraid to say that at my last job, because they would have thought I was not working hard enough or something, right? So it's a tightrope, right? I feel like there are certain things that I do need that are just things like that, but that's not a big deal because it doesn't happen that often. And I do think it depends on someone's particular, everybody's symptoms different. So I don't want to say what's going on with your husband in particular, but like, it also, I'm able to ask for things like, and I can ask, because like some of these things are because of the job that I have, and some of these things are because of the manager I have, in the sense that, like, not a lot of people go to my office. I'm about to get on the train and go to the office, and I'll probably be the only person there. So it's not a big deal for me to choose where I sit because I'm the only person going there, right? If there were 300 people there, then I probably wouldn't have as much of a choice, and it would be more of a big deal for me to move, right? I don't mean that it's open. I mean, I have my assigned seat, but like, it doesn't matter because, it's and also the job is hybrid. I get bored at home, so I go in sometimes. Like, I just can't sit here all day. I can't do it. But like, the fact that we're flexible, right? Part of that, again, is just the circumstance of the job, is because we're a national organization. So it doesn't matter where you are, we're going to be on Zoom anyway. Right. Even if we were all in the office, if you're in California and I'm here, well, we're going to be on Zoom anyway. So that's why they said, what's the point? Right. Of forcing people. So a lot of it is that I think there's, it's a tightrope and it's a challenge. It's why I'm working on the neurodivergent student thing also, and why I put this stuff into my language stuff, even though it's not about that, because I don't think that there's enough being said. And also, I think that people still think that all neurodivergent people are hyperactive white boys. And I am pretty hyperactive, but I'm not white. So.
Brilliant. I think we will end it there and let everyone get on with their Friday. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I think my colleagues have just put up a discount code where you can get 50% off the book if you don't already have it. I think the discount code is ALT50. So yeah, look out for the 5th season, did you say, of the podcast coming on Monday, and then a book for K-12 teachers in the US, and then there will be something else from Multilingual Matters at some point in the not too distant future as well. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good day.
Wait, I'll just say the podcast is called Unstandardized English, if you don't know. I didn't say that. It's called Unstandardized English. You can get it where you get podcasts. You know where you get podcasts. It's there.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.